Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. We continue our offseason breakdowns in the West. And before we do get started with this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so now we're moving on to continuing to go through the Western Conference, and today we are on the New Orleans Pelicans. New Orleans Pelicans, right? Actually had a good year last year, kind of, for at different points, right? They finished the year 49-33, right? They made the playoffs after missing the playoffs the year before. But, their road was kind of intriguing because earlier in the season, they kind of struggled. They didn't play that great. And Zion wasn't playing well, and Ingram seemed like he was their best player. Right? Then you had that horrible play-in situation where the Pelicans got destroyed by, 40 points or whatever against the Lakers in Vegas in that semifinals in the play-in tournament. And everybody talked about how bad Zion looked, how out of shape he looked, and just everything, right? Like just everything that could have gone wrong for him was going wrong at that point. But then something happened. Then all of a sudden, Zion, he just started to kind of, over the course of the season, seemed like he got in better shape and was just overall just playing better. He turned up his level of production on both ends of the floor, and it allowed New Orleans to actually start kind of playing up to, what you would have hoped their quote-unquote ceiling would have been. So after kind of struggling in December, right, then all of a sudden, towards the second half of the season, he was giving you, like over, 24 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, right? That was his averages in March, right? Because his rebounding at different points was just not really good, not really where you would like it to be. The effectiveness from the field was a little bit down. Free throws, same thing. And all of that, obviously, again, kind of coincided with the Pelicans, starting to kind of finish the season strong. But then, unfortunately, Brandon Ingram gets hurt, which has kind of been the story of this team for the last several seasons at this point, where one or the other or both just can't really seem to stay healthy. And then, they ended up kind of falling down to the play-in after at one point looking like they might get to the 4 or 5 spot. Then, of course, that final regular season game against the Lakers, once again, like the play-in, they looked awful. They got embarrassed off the floor, got blown out. Then they had the actual play-in game, and Zion had the game of his life, right? Basically 40 points in, essentially a not must win because it's not like you're eliminated, but if you win, you're in the 7th seed. But then he got hurt right towards the end of the game when it looked like the Pelicans were going to come back and steal it. And then they win the second game against the Kings, and then obviously they lose in the first round, get swept by Oklahoma City. Brandon Ingram has a bad series, right? So obviously, since that point, for New Orleans, you look at what they've kind of been trying to do. Obviously, right, the guy that runs the team, right, David Griffin, kind of mentioned and hinted at the idea of, yeah, we've kind of seen enough with this group, right? So it's time, basically hinting at it's time to make changes. And to be fair, they did make a change, right? Obviously, they traded for DeJounte Murray, right? Sending out Larry Nance Jr., right? Dyson Daniels, right? The pick that they got from the Lakers that they had the option of either doing whatever with, right? I think it's for 2025, so this upcoming draft, obviously. And, just like a few other spare parts, right? So, to be honest, you really didn't have to give up a ton for DeJounte Murray in terms of the actual talent. The only issue is that it was kind of at some positions, that you would kind of like to have a little bit more of, right? Because obviously Larry Nance Jr. is a big, right? And then they also had Jonas Valanciunas walk in free agency. Bless you. So then after that, now they're kind of going in without a center, right? Obviously they have a number of other, pieces and players on the team, right? You still have McCollum. Obviously, you added DeJounte Murray. You still have Zion and Brandon Ingram. You also have Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Jordan Hawkins. But that center rotation, right? You have Daniel Tice, right, who's been a veteran around the league, but I wouldn't necessarily call him, an ideal starting center. Then you also have Yves Missi, right? That's the guy that they drafted in the first round, who I guess, would kind of project to be sort of like a rim-running, athletic, defensive-minded big. But he's also a rookie. He's 20 years old, so you can't necessarily expect a ton out of him, and it's probably not fair to ask him to be a starting center when he's just, a very raw basketball player. So after that, who in the world is the center? Right now, I don't know. I would kind of assume Daniel Tice, but again, against some of these other teams that have a lot of size, I don't think that's very ideal because you already have the issue of Zion and Brandon Ingram aren't great, defenders. McCollum's not a great defender, right? Murray was a good defender in San Antonio, but he wasn't really that great defensively for Atlanta. Can he be better defensively for New Orleans? You would hope so, just because there's, some more creation and other talent in there. And then obviously Herb Jones, he's really good defensively, and we'll see how Murphy progresses. But it's just bizarre because it just feels like when you look at this roster, it seems like that there was sort of a deal made for DeJounte Murray with kind of another deal in mind, maybe for Brandon Ingram. Then you could go in and be like, all right, we have, Murray, and then I guess McCollum, right? And then either Herb Jones or Trey Murphy, and then Zion, and then whatever your big is, right? But seems like so far that hasn't been the case. So they're starting five. I don't know. I'm going to assume, that Herb Jones probably moves to the bench, right? Because he had been starting and he had been playing well, but he's probably going to be in the second unit. So the Pelicans will still have a relatively deep second unit because you'll have Murphy, Jones. We'll see if Hawkins progresses to be a consistent rotational guy because he is a good shooter. And then whatever their big situation is. But I don't know. It just feels like that there's something missing, and that's kind of the concern that I would have with this Pelicans roster, where it's just because you have such an absence of talent at that big spot, and also not really a lot of size either. It just feels like that you may have a problem going against some of these other teams. Where again, if you're going against the Nuggets, right? Who are you going to put on Jokic, right? If you're going against Philly, who are you guarding Embiid with? Or, Milwaukee, right? Giannis and Lopez, or, AD on the Lakers, right? I mean, most teams have some type of big man that even if they're not elite, they still might potentially be a problem just because of their size. And, obviously, even the guys that aren't elite, right? You may struggle a little bit more against those guys, right? Like even like a Zach Edey for Memphis, right? He's huge, right? So who are you putting on him if you're New Orleans? So that's where I don't really love all of that. I do think the trade for DeJounte Murray, it's fine, right? Because it was kind of something that was hinted at the trade deadline that New Orleans was trying to do, right? And that, maybe they revisited in the offseason, and they did. And again, you didn't have to give up a lot. It wasn't like you had to send back, one of your other starters. But, it does kind of hurt trading away Nance and letting Valanciunas walk because it's just where's the big man depth, right? And maybe you can get it. But again, as we've consistently started to talk about, there's not a lot of like obvious trade targets that are kind of, around there, especially even for the centers, right? Because obviously there are centers that are good, but not all of these teams are just going to give up centers for X, Y, and Z. And, if you look at New Orleans, all right, if you're going to trade Brandon Ingram, right? Well, what's the team that wants Brandon Ingram and then also presumably has some type of center that they're willing to give up? Go find one, right? Like Jared Allen for Cleveland. Okay, well he can't be traded anytime soon until like what, February or whatever, if he can even be traded at all. I think it's February, but either way, does Cleveland want Brandon Ingram? I don't know, right? You look around the rest of the league, right? Golden State, do they want Brandon Ingram? Probably not. And it's not that Brandon Ingram is bad. It's not that he's terrible. He's not horrible at all. He's a good player. And, if you go back a couple seasons ago, he had a great postseason against the Suns when Zion didn't play. But unfortunately, with the new CBA, I feel like a lot of these teams might just be a little bit, hesitant to try to just trade for a guy that presumably wants a $200+ million deal. And he's not necessarily probably a guy that could be your best player on a team, or maybe even second best. Just kind of depending on, I guess, who your best player is. But either way, it's just that, there's certain parts of his game that he would need to improve on, I think, for, almost anybody to want him, right? Because, like, he's, he can hit threes, but, he doesn't necessarily take a high volume of them. And then he's also not a great defender, right? If he could do both of those things, that would be pretty ideal because then, obviously it'd be not that he's a 3-and-D guy, but he could, he can score and then also shoot and defend at a high level. But he doesn't do either of those things at a super high level. Obviously, he can score in the mid-range, he can get to the basket. I mean, he's got some good playmaking, facilitating abilities. So it's not like he's a bad player. It's just, there's certain aspects of his game that probably don't translate as well to some of these other teams. And that's where it might just be kind of an issue. So I'm not sure, what New Orleans really does there, right? They might have to go into the season where, your five best players, I mean, presumably may not be able to start together, right? Because their five best players, none of them, you know, you would really want at the five, for really any stretch, right? Maybe you could try to experiment and see what Zion looks like at the center spot, but that's probably not going to be ideal if it's Murray, McCollum, and then, Ingram, Jones, and Zion, right? I think he'd probably like, a better defensive guard in that mix. Or maybe another guy that's more of a wing oriented player. So that's the problem, right? Then you look at the draft, right? Like I already mentioned, they drafted Yves Missi, right? So that's, possibly a center of the future, but not really a center of right now, just because we don't really know what to expect from him. And it's not fair to expect a rookie, a 20-year-old center, to just step in and just be a reliable option at the five. Like that's just not really realistic. They did, I think, grab another big man, Carlo Matkovic, right, from overseas. So does he play at all? Does he get any burn? I mean, maybe. I mean, it's possible. I mean, he's, because he's a little bit further along than Misi because he's 23. But I don't know. It's kind of hard to really get a real feel for, this team because 49 games is good. So they were a good team last year and could have possibly been better, right, had Ingram not had his injuries. They could have been like a 50-win team. But it feels like that right now, like you did get the talent upgrade with Murray, but you don't necessarily have like a lot of pieces that fit together right now. They do have a lot of depth, which they had already had before, right? You lost a little bit of defensive depth, I guess, because Dyson Daniels is gone. But obviously his issue is he can't shoot. And he would need to progress as a shooter. But, it's always kind of rough to just get rid of a lottery talent. So, again, B minus. I mean, because the Murray deal I think is solid. It's just I wish they would have done a little bit more, you know, for that center spot. And again, like there weren't a lot of great options in free agency anyways that the Pelicans could realistically get. But it just losing Valanciunas for nothing. And I understand that maybe they don't want to pay the tax or whatever, but that's kind of rough. And again, like to be fair, we knew he was on his way out because we knew they weren't going to pay everybody. It just feels like it would have been nice if there was some sort of contingency plan. Like, okay, we're not going to re-sign him. Maybe we could have traded him. I mean, I know he was on an expiring, so maybe that was the problem there. But it just feels rough, especially because in Washington he's making like $10 million a year. So it's not like it's a crazy amount. But I would have liked to have seen the Pelicans do a little bit more. And it's just still the issue of, Zion and Ingram, how successful can that duo really be? Because we've seen them win games when they're healthy. But the problem is, as we said the year before, and even before we did this podcast, that's what everybody's kind of been talking about. Where it's just those guys need to be healthy. And Ingram played 64 games last year, which is the most he's played since his rookie year. Before that, the year before it was 45 games. Then it was 55, right? 61 out of a 72 game season, which is solid, right? And then 62 out of that was the bubble year. So I want to say that the Pelicans, they were in the bubble. So I think they played 72 games. So, those 2 years he was relatively healthy. But then year before that, 52 out of 82, 59. And that's just Ingram, right? That doesn't even include Zion, right? Who basically had two completely lost seasons, right? Where, his rookie year, right? If you go back and look, I mean, he played 24 games out of 72, then 61 out of 72, which was great. Then missed his entire third season, then played 29 games 2 seasons ago, 70 last year, which is good. So hopefully we're on the right track for that. But, again, I don't know. And then you got Trey Murphy. He's got an extension, right? Is he going to be happy, probably playing slightly less minutes, right? Maybe that messes with his money. Who knows? You've already paid Herb Jones, which is nice. That's a good deal. But I don't know. It feels like we're starting to get to a point with New Orleans where you kind of have to start, prepping for being the team that you're going to be. And you're probably going to have to really actually decide and lock in on which guys are actually going to be real pieces of the future. Because I don't think, all of these guys are going to be able to play together and the Pelicans can actually, really do something at a high level. Like, I'm sure they could win a number of games because they have talent. But, I'm sure they would like to do better than just a first round exit where they get swept. I'm sure they would like to maybe finish as a higher seed, and then maybe win a playoff game or two, right? Possibly a series. But, As of right now, it feels like they're still another move away from that happening. But I do kind of like some parts of this roster, but the big man spot just really kills it for me, where I just think that part is going to be really tough to overcome if they don't do something about it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because that's kind of the perfect segue into where I want to take the conversation because yeah, I'm a little bit lower on this team's off season and probably the team in general. I give them a C for the offseason just because they didn't really address the big man situation. They actually traded away or lost three big men. I think it was Cody Zeller,
Oh yeah,
um,
him too.
yeah, Valanciunas, and then Larry Nance Jr. So you cleared out your big man room to bring in one unknown big and one, I guess I don't even really consider Tice serviceable. I'm just gonna say that off rip.
He's a
So
backup center. He's not a starting
that's what
center.
I'm saying. So, that's what I think the most frustrating thing is. Another thing I want to harp on a little bit. The starting lineup is going to be one of the weirdest things to figure
Yeah.
out, I think, because in my opinion, I'm not starting CJ McCollum. I'm bringing him off the bench. I think not that he's washed, but I just don't think he's a starter at this point. As much crap as people gave Brandon Ingram, throughout the season and really the playoffs too, I think you have to kind of give some of that to CJ McCollum as well. Granted, not all his fault because he's been playing out of position for like the past 2 years. He's really a two guard, not a one, and they've been playing him at the one. So that's why I really like the DeJounte Murray trade. Because you bring in a true one that can, do a lot of things on both
Right.
ends of the floor, a lot better than CJ McCollum, in my opinion. So, like I said, I think the DeJounte Murray trade was a home run, but you didn't address anything else, quite literally,
Yeah.
and that's really frustrating. Um, I would, my starting lineup would probably be DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, I don't know, Brandon Ingram and Zion. I feel like you have to start all those guys. There's no way that I could see them starting CJ McCollum, not with this roster, because like it would just be Atlanta all over again. I just don't think DeJounte Murray can play with a guy like CJ McCollum or Trey Young. We've seen it. So
Hmm.
that's kind of my philosophy on that. But overall, they just didn't do enough. Like I said, in the short, I talked about it half baked. It's really half finished in my opinion. Like I said, you did a great job getting DeJounte Murray, but you did nothing else, and I'm kind of concerned about that because what do what does this team look like when they face bigger ones, like you were talking about? Like these guys are gonna have a really tough time, like guarding Wemby, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's like, what can you do? Now, I will say this: I think their entire season is pretty much contingent once again on Zion Williamson and his health, availability, and what also he looks like. Because if he looks
Hmm.
like fringe MVP Zion, okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. I think they make the playoffs easily. They're a lock. But if he
Hmm.
looks out of shape, overweight, etc., I don't need to go into too much detail with that. Yeah, then this team is not going very far, no matter who you bring in. And that's just the
Yeah.
reality. Alongside having Brandon Ingram there, it's just negative because I think there's so much looming now. Because you already talked about it, the statement that was put out, we've seen enough. And you
Hmm.
just pretty much brought in one guy and kept the core the same. So I would think that those guys, who were kind of on the hot seat would feel a little slighted. And, Brandon Ingram, I think, does. The problem is there's just not a market for him. So, you know, it's kind of hard to blame them for not trading Brandon Ingram when there isn't a whole lot of interest. But at the same time, I feel like there is something that they could have done and still probably can do. But I'm
Yeah.
just curious when we'll see it.
Right, and that's the tough part, just because, like you said, there's not an obvious move out there where it's just there's not a move where you can kind of look and be like, oh yeah, the Pelicans should probably swap Ingram for that guy, right? Even people where it's like, you know, people who cover the NBA, right, where they kind of were that's almost all they not almost all they do, but a lot of what they do is where they talk about mock trades where they can't find one. They can't have like a great deal that works for both sides, right? Where both teams kind of feel like, yeah, this works. And that's the issue there, right? And then, the roster itself, offensively, you're talking about a lot of guys that need the ball in their hands in order to be
Yeah.
effective, right? At their best, right? Like DeJounte Murray at his best needs the ball in his hands. Brandon Ingram Zion Williamson, right? All these guys. Even like, CJ can play off the ball, but he likes to kind of play with the ball in his hands as a scorer as well,
Yeah.
right? Like most of these guys need that. And that's just, that's something that's probably not going to be all that feasible. Then you're talking about two guys in Ingram and Zion where, Zion doesn't really shoot threes at all. Nobody guards him from out there. So,
No.
off the ball, not really a threat there, even though he can be a threat as like a roller, or like a guy in the post or a lob threat or something like that. But he doesn't do all that stuff that
Right.
consistently, right?
Right.
He prefers to play, which again, he's a very good passer playmaker, so he probably should have more opportunities with the ball in his hands. It's just how much is that going to happen when all these other guys need the ball, and how excited, which you kind of hinted at. How excited are all these guys going to be? Because you already said, like, the team, the guy at the top has already kind of suggested there should be some moves, but how excited are all these guys going to be when there's going to be multiple possessions where 3 out of those 4 guys that need the ball are going to be standing in the corner somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and that's
Yeah.
going to happen with this roster. And that's where, again, what's the move? I mean, like, if we're trying to theorize and try to craft, some type of Ingram, deal where you can get a center for New Orleans, and then the other team gets Brandon Ingram as a wing. Like, what is it? What's the deal? That's where I really don't, have a clue, where that really goes, because we talked about it. Some of the teams that some people have thought about, they just don't realistically, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, I just don't think Cleveland is going to trade Jared Allen for Brandon Ingram, right?
What about
Like,
Utah? Walker Kessler.
Utah,
Have you heard
that's
about that
something.
one? The Walker Kessler one?
Yeah, Utah is something that I think is, an interesting deal, because we've heard about the idea of, Walker Kessler being in some trade rumors, right? I remember we were talking about in a previous episode a rumor about, hey, maybe Utah could be interested in Brandon Ingram, and I think that had been mentioned on some podcasts before. I just kind of wonder if with Kessler, is it possible that maybe Utah was just kind of not lying about him being available in trades, but is it possible that maybe they feel like, all right, last year you don't have a guy like Mike Conley, you have more offensive oriented guards, and maybe that's kind of the reason why he felt like he took a little bit of a step back compared to, like, maybe he's just not as good as we thought he might be. And then you still have to find a way to make the contracts work, so it would probably be more likely that the other guys for Utah might be in that deal, right? Like, one of those other, a combination of, like, Kessler plus something else, but then it's like, what does New Orleans give up? I don't know, because Kessler's contract is so small.
Hmm.
So you would probably need, a couple of those veteran guys, right? Like, but what does New Orleans do? Like, are they going to be like, let's trade Brandon Ingram for John Collins? Like, are they
Hmm.
going to do that? Like,
No.
probably not.
I've
Like, I mean, I don't
I
think so.
I also found another one. This one's kind of
Mhm.
interesting, but I don't know if this would probably happen. So,
Okay.
3-team trade. That probably
Mhm.
already nixes it, honestly. But Hawks would get Desumu and Hawkins.
Mhm.
Bulls get Ingram, Buffkin, Cody Zeller, Garrison Matthews.
Mhm.
Pelicans receive Lonzo and Vucevic and a 2028 second round pick.
It's interesting. I guess I'd be curious as to why New Orleans would want Lonzo Ball back. But
I'm assuming contract wise,
yeah,
and then
he's
you're
an
you're
expiring.
taking on Vucevic, and I guess he's a serviceable center, better than Missy
Yeah,
and Tice,
right.
so it's an upgrade.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, it's not an ideal fit because he's not a great defender, and
Yeah,
last year he didn't shoot the ball well, but it's still a better talent than, you know, everyone else on the roster that's a
yeah,
center. So, it's like, if the opportunity arises for New Orleans to grab a center, they should jump on it, because of the fact that if you want to be a serious team, you can't be a serious team that has Daniel Tice or Yves Missi as your starting center,
yeah,
and you don't really have the players around that for that to really make a whole lot of sense. And I don't think Zion should probably be the center on this team either. But, again, starting 5, who knows what they're going to do. But that's something that they're going to have to figure out. And then, again, like I mentioned, Trey Murphy's in the last year of his deal, so he's due for an extension. I'm going to assume at some point they pay him. But do they pay him before the season starts? If Ingram wasn't on this team, they probably would have. But
yeah.
because he's still on the team, they're probably going to be like, well, let's wait it out, right? Let's see what his numbers look like, and then, we'll go from there. But, I don't know. That's just kind of a weird situation for a lot of those guys to be in. So, you know, that it's again, I'm not like you said, it's all primarily hinging on Zion because if he, plays at an all NBA level, then you can kind of overcome some of the clunkiness of the roster just because of how good he is individually.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's, relatively similar to what he's kind of been for certain stretches, then it's going to be hard. Like, the Pelicans over under right now is 46.5. So, that's a little bit less than it was last year. But, the question is, you know, can this team win 47 games?
That's tough because this is my take on it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
objectively and wholly, they got better. Like, the rotation is better. But
Mm-hmm.
then when you drill and look at the five, it's disgusting. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go. You said it was 47
Yeah, 46.5.
with the roster the way that it looks right now. I would say under. They don't have a
I
center.
I agree with
If
that.
there's a
And because
change and
that's
they get a serviceable center, I could see that increase. I could see them winning 49 games just like last year.
yeah. Because even Valanciunas was like a more than serviceable big for them. I mean,
Yeah, he was
again,
very
I
good
know,
for them.
yeah, like he wasn't perfect, but he would still be better than what you would have. Like
Yeah,
ideally, you'd like to have some type of two-way stretch big next to Zion, that can space the floor, but those guys are not super easy to find. And clearly there's nobody that like that that's available on a minimum. I mean, because otherwise they would have it, Like I mean, that's just not really feasible. So
right.
that's the issue. And that's where, there's a version of this where, if Zion is out for a stretch, it might be even tougher than it was last year because you do have more offensive talent, but you kind of are going to be losing a little bit, on the defensive end probably because, again, a guy like a Herb Jones is probably not going to start. I mean, I guess he might start if Zion is out, but Zion already being out hurts. And then, you factor that in with not really a lot of depth at the big spot, right? And no matter which conference you're playing in, there's going to be teams with size.
Right.
So, that's a real issue. So I know it sounds kind of like a repetitive statement, but it you have to harp on it because of the fact that you just can't ignore the fact that you compare this team's center depth to a lot of these other teams, and it's kind of non-existent. I mean, even a team like the Lakers, like they don't have any center depth after Anthony Davis, but at least you can say we have Anthony Davis, But for a team like New Orleans, I mean, what do you have at that 5 spot? And it's not, and again, like you can get away with not having a great center if you have, solid pieces at other positions, and they do. It's just that some of those guys I feel like should just be playing more minutes, and they're not going to more than likely, given what they have already at the top of the roster.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, CJ McCollum. It's not even that he's a bad player.
Not at
It's
all.
just that now that you have DeJounte Murray, you don't really need him and CJ McCollum.
Nope.
You need one of them, and then presumably the other guard is a guy that's more willing to defend and be kind of like a low usage guy, right? Like a Herb Jones. Like if it was like DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion, and then whatever. Like that's a decent start. That's a good starting 5, right? Like would I pencil them in for a championship? Probably not. But that's a team that could probably win close to 50 games,
Yeah,
or
agreed.
something like that. Maybe more if you have a great version of Zion. But with this version of the roster, like you said, you'll still probably win games, but I don't know if you'll be able to win enough. Like, do I expect them to win 49 games like last year? I don't think so. I think they're going to probably do worse.
Yeah.
But like you said, like it may feel like a more talented roster, but the team as a whole may not be quite as good. Like
Bingo.
that's kind of the issue there, just because of you just have some missing pieces, and
Bingo.
that's my point where I said I think it might be another move away. Where again, like does it have to be Brandon Ingram that has to be moved? Not necessarily, because you wouldn't just give him up for nothing. But it just feels like somebody on that roster needs to be moved in order to make room for some of the other pieces that I think could help a little bit more than what they have. Like it just, the term too many cooks in the kitchen, it kind of feels like that's what New Orleans has right
Yeah.
now, where they need to kind of do something. But I mean, it's been dead silent in New Orleans for quite a while at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, we have no idea what to really make of what's going on right now. So I
And
don't
this is
really
a
expect.
deadline team.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really expect them to do anything before the season starts. I'm going to assume, that they'll go into the season, see what they have, and then whatever they feel like they might try to do, maybe they fix at the deadline. But I mean, didn't really see a lot of teams make deadline moves, last season. We saw a few, but not like a ton, not like it had been in previous years. But, we'll have to see. I guess, one question is, does Brandon Ingram show up to training camp? Because he sat out the one that was, kind of like the voluntary one or whatever you want to call it, like the mini camp that they did, like a month or so ago, right? So do you think he shows up to this training camp, or do you think he ends up sitting out and then the situation gets a little bit ugly?
I think he
Because
has
he
to
hasn't
take the L.
come out and publicly said anything, negative about this situation, but you just kind of wonder.
Yeah, I think he's gonna quietly take the L and just show up. I don't.
Okay.
He doesn't really like peg me as the guy as like you know, the one to make a whole lot of noise. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Not a super vocal guy at all. So, um, I would definitely assume that he's gonna show up, and I think he should because that'll kind of not necessarily boost his value, but kind of maintain it, and it won't like tank it or anything like that.
Yeah. And then, just kind of looking at some other players, they're younger guys that are on the roster.
Mm.
What would we like to see from guys like Trey Murphy and Jordan Hawkins going into, this season? Because those are the two guys that are of the rotational guys, I guess, outside of Zion, right? Some of the younger pieces on this roster that we expect to get minutes, right? Because, like, even Ingram, he's not old by any means, right? But he's 27, so he's probably is what he is at this point. McCollum is 33,
Yeah.
and then Murray's 28, Jones is 26. So, and Jones has gotten better pretty much every year. So, Murphy and Hawkins are kind of the guys that would stand out as the younger guys. So, what would we like to see from them, going into year two?
Yeah,
Or not year two, not year two, but what would we like to see from them this upcoming season?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super hyped for them because I think Herb Jones is one of those guys where a late 3-and-D player, and he also has athleticism as well. So I'm kind of hoping that he can. It's going to be tough for him to do this because of the team that he's on, and the amount of guys that need the ball. Um,
Yeah.
but I kind of want to see him take a jump in points. I don't know if that's going to happen because efficiency wise, I think he's about as good as you could possibly get for a guy in his situation and position. So
Yeah.
maybe like from 11 to 14, maybe that. I mean, that would be a solid jump. But
Mhm.
how likely is that considering you just brought in another ball dominant guy? Jordan Hawkins, kind of same thing. I kind of want to see just better efficiency from him, honestly. But in the times that he did fill in for guys who were injured, I mean, I thought he looked pretty solid and serviceable as a rookie. So, great 3-point shooter. Just continue to shoot threes and make them. That's what I would say. You're a solid option, and you can definitely create some floor spacing for the team as well. Alvarado, I kind of consider him as one of the younger guys as well. I think I would kind of be intrigued to see what his role is now that now that they brought in DeJounte Murray, and it's like
Yeah.
I don't know.
I guess he could be kind of in those two guard lineups where he's kind of like the defensive guy. Like you could have him and
Yeah,
Murray takes the tougher assignment, or
yeah,
him and CJ he takes on the tougher assignment. Maybe.
yeah. Do you think Antonio Reeves plays a lot or not really?
Mhm. Probably not, because I just
Okay.
feel like the guys that they moved out, you're probably just going to elevate Hawkins, and then after that, probably the two bigs, right? Which would just kind of take up the space of the two bigs they already had. So it's probably Hawkins that gets elevated. And then maybe, I guess, to make up for Najee Marshall, maybe Javante Green, maybe he
Yeah,
plays,
yeah,
or something like that, just because that's a guy that's kind of bounced around as like a two-way, small ball wing forward. So I don't know. Like it feels like that their other forwards like Jones and Murphy might have to start guarding bigger players. Like you might have to see Jones maybe guard more fours and fives, or
oh boy,
same with Murphy or something like that. I'm not saying they have to, but that might be the only way you can make some of these lineups work. Because, like you said, there's probably going to be more lineups where we see Zion at the five, just because you don't have a lot of great options at center. And they had moments where he was playing at the center spot last season at different points, right? But a lot of times when they went small, they would at least like to have Nance out there. But if it wasn't Nance or Valanciunas, then it was usually Zion, and then they would just surround him with all those other, defensive guys, right? Like you didn't usually see Zion at the 5, but then it was also like Brandon Ingram and McCollum and other guys, right? Like it was usually like, the lineups where it's Zion and the lower usage 3-and-D guys, like Zion, Alvarado, Jones, Murphy, like those guys. It wasn't really the scores out there. So,
Yeah.
for Zion, like I'm curious to see what his responsibilities will be because again, with another ball handler in the mix, right? Does he all of a sudden kind of shift to some other big man stuff? I don't know. Like you're going to need probably a good year from him on the boards. Because we know he's not a strong defender. So that's the thing about this roster is that some of it's going to rely on internal development, and then some of it's going to rely on you're going to have to bank on and hope that some of these guys can stay healthy because
Yeah. Facts.
if they don't, there's going to be some problems. And like we already said, I don't expect them to win 50 games this season with the roster like you said is currently constructed. Maybe if they kind of take people by surprise and get off to a hot start and then make a move, maybe, but it's just hard to say because again, it's kind of wild how the center position kind of went because it felt like at one point that the center position was kind of going away. Not that centers all of a sudden became complete trash, but it just felt like the importance of them started to kind of drop off. But now they're back and it's kind of hard to really have a roster that doesn't have not that you have to have an elite one, but you got to have at least somebody that's capable of doing things at the 5. And I guess New Orleans technically does have that, but, they need a little bit better talent. But
Yeah.
they also have the 6th toughest schedule in the league, according to NBA Tankathon. So that's not necessarily ideal either, right?
Mm-mm.
But, again, it is a younger team. So you would hope that they wouldn't necessarily have a fatigue problem, but you still have an issue of health and durability because you just have a number of guys on this roster that you can't count on to play a full season. And if that happens, they do have a lot of depth, so so they could probably make up for it at certain positions. But I wouldn't think you'd want to lose one of your forwards for a stretch because of the fact that you don't have another center.
Yeah, it might be GG for this team. I think, the center thing is literally going to haunt them until they address it. So they better get on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, so after that, I mean, when you look at this New Orleans roster again, like, is it a good team? Sure. But is it a team that I expect to really do anything significant next season? No, not really. Not as currently constructed, right? Like last year, I think they ended up being better than I expected. But this season, I feel like they'll probably be, well, worse than I would expect. Well, maybe not worse, but I don't expect them to be as good this year. And I think they'll probably fall in line there, right? But I guess the real question is, what is a successful season ultimately for New Orleans?
Um, I mean, with the rosters currently constructed, I don't see them going past the first round, if even
Hmm.
making it there. But if they
But
do
like, if you're
address
the,
the big man
Mhm.
situation,
But
um,
I guess if you're the front office and ownership, what are you hoping to do this year? Like, does a first round series victory would that be a successful year and then anything less than that is a failure? Because like if you miss the playoffs, that'd be I would say for New Orleans a bad season, like a failure of a season, considering they just made the playoffs last year.
I mean, if I'm the general manager, then I would say first round, you have to win in the first round. So second round exit, nothing more, nothing less. Like they don't
Yeah,
have the personnel to go past the second round. And if their GM thinks they do,
right.
then that GM is very delusional. Um, but at the same time, like you can't miss the playoffs again. That's all I'm gonna say. Because look at the talent on
Right.
the roster. You can't. No excuse.
Yeah. Well, as they say, as long as there is delusion, there is hope.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
you know, but yeah, I think that's the tough part because you're, now that you have these guys that are, like Zion and Ingram that are, continuing to progress, right? They're not necessarily 20-year-old rookies anymore. You're not really at the point where, oh, we can be happy with, we missed the playoffs, but we look like a better team. It's like, no, now you're at a point where now some of these guys are getting paid a decent amount of money. So you can't necessarily be okay with, a bad season where you miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I like you said, I don't think this team is built to be able to win multiple playoff rounds, right? Like it's a team where they'd have to catch a team, where it's a good matchup for them that doesn't have like a lot of punishing size, right? Where a guy like a Zion can kind of just bully some of these other, guys on the roster. But if they finish as like a 7-8 seed, I mean, you're going to be going against some really good teams. So that's the problem is that they're going to have to win a lot of games, but I think it might be a little bit tougher for them to do that. Cuz like offensively, they should be fine. Like they should be able to score, relatively easily. But last year they kind of made their mark as, more of a defensive team, even which is odd because you don't really look at that roster necessarily and feel like there's a lot of lockdown defenders. But I feel like they're going to take a step back on defense. But I think they should be better offensively. But I just don't think it will be balanced enough to be able to make up for it. And so I don't want to say it's going to be a net negative, but it might be a little bit of a net negative because, like you said, they added a talent upgrade, but I just think the fit across the rest of the roster isn't ideal, and I think that's going to be a problem for them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there anything else about this New Orleans roster that kind of stands out, you know, or is it kind of just another team that's kind of just that's kind of just lumped together with everyone else?
Yeah, they're just another team that's kind of, I guess, trying their best to escape that thick pack in the Western Conference that has kind of started to formulate over the past couple of seasons. But I just don't think that they have what it takes to get out of there at the moment and as currently constructed. If they go out and get a, great fit big man, but also don't, lose a ton of stuff in doing so, then yeah, I for sure would say that they have a solid chance of like being a spoiler.
Yeah, and that's the rough part because again, it's like it felt like New Orleans was kind of on the rise, and they actually, again, they had a great stretch last year during the latter part of the season, but it feels like they're kind of headed towards taking a step back until they can address some of these issues on this roster. But let us know your thoughts in the comments on the New Orleans Pelicans and where you see them relative to the rest of the conference. Because, like I said, I'm with you where I feel like they're just going to probably be like another team in the rest of the Western Conference. And, again, I think they're going to have to make some adjustments there in order to kind of reach whatever the ceiling is. Like, I don't feel like it's a championship ceiling, anyways. I just don't necessarily think Zion is at the point where you can rely on him enough consistently to be a championship team. But, again, I think that there are ways at least to upgrade the team to make it better, but it just doesn't seem like it's available right now. Like I'm sure they're not just kind of like just, not doing anything. I really do think that some of these deals may just not necessarily be there for a lot of these teams.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so now going into news and rumors, Ben Simmons cleared for Nets camp after injury rehab will have no restrictions according to NBA insider Chris Haynes. So, again, we're back at it again. I know there's already been some clips going around on social media with Ben Simmons, his offseason runs that he does, right? There's already been clips of Killian Hayes and Simmons together, potentially the next great backcourt in the NBA, for the Brooklyn Nets. But what do we expect from Ben Simmons at this point? Because we already kind of went through the Nets team earlier, when we were doing our Eastern Conference rebuilds. But is there any hope for Ben Simmons left? He's in a contract year. Do we get contract year Benjamin Simmons, or is it more so just don't expect really much of anything? Anything that he gives you is a plus. Can he play 50 games? Can he give you 10 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, something like that? Or, what is an actual like good expectation for him?
As the great Magic Conch Shell once told us, no. I'm kidding. But overall, like in all seriousness, I think I've given up on him. Um Last season I kind of had a little bit of hope. I was like, he could potentially make a comeback. It's kind of right there for the taking, the roster is pretty thin. You have a chance to not necessarily be the guy, but be a guy. But I don't think he's gonna do that at all. I just don't see it. I think he's
Mm-hmm.
completely fallen out of love with the game of basketball mentally, and I don't blame him. Just due to his situation and what occurred in Philadelphia. But at the end of the day, it's tragic because that was one of my favorite players. But yeah, I think we're done here.
Yeah, I would probably agree with
I
that.
mean,
Where
I just don't see it.
I was this close to getting sucked in last year to the Ben Simmons, situation, but I was just a little bit hesitant to truly jump in because I
Right.
just didn't know what we were gonna get, and again, not even taking a victory lap at all for that one because like you said, it is a rough situation. You know, it's
Yeah.
not really something that I'm excited about or cheering about,
Mm-mm.
but just unfortunate where it's just, you're just kind of hoping and waiting to see it, and we don't know if we're going to get it. And the longer we move away from it, probably just more likely we're not going to get it at all.
Bingo.
Yeah. And Shams Charania, Rockets waiving AJ Griffin, 21-year-old forward expected to step away from basketball. We kind of already touched on to that. But now he is officially away from the roster, of course, right after we do our Rockets rebuild. But we already knew about that, so he wasn't factoring in anyways. But just, a bizarre situation. But hopefully, whatever is going on with him, hopefully it's something that, he can, just recover from, or whatever's going on. We don't know what it is, but hopefully it's not something that will impact him away from the game, and that he can kind of just, resume normal life and just kind of do whatever he needs to do and be okay.
Yeah, it's
That's
a
all I can
crazy
really.
situation. I haven't
Mhm.
dug too much, but people have been, and the details are not looking too good from
Mhm.
either side. So, if you want to,
Okay.
please go out and look, at that story and stuff. I don't think we should talk about it on here, but regardless, very sad and unfortunate situation that's potentially going on
Yeah.
with him.
And then last but not least, the Philadelphia 76ers are going to give Joel Embiid 3-year max extension deal, 193 million, which includes 301 million guaranteed over the next 5 years. Right? Obviously, we know with Philly, they've been, making moves this offseason, right? And it's kind of wild how we went from what's going to happen with Philly, what's going to happen with Embiid, does he get moved? And, obviously with this extension, at least now for the foreseeable future, right? He's going to be in Philly, right? And he's going to be continuing to rep them, and he's going to be the face of that franchise. And, now Philly is going to try to, have a chance to try to contend for a championship. And, it feels like right now is their best shot. It's going to be tough because Embiid is 30, and it feels like health wise, you can't rely on him, right? It's never really been too much of a question about his talent. It's primarily been about his health. But the problem is, because of the health issues, it's very tough for me to realistically see Philly as a true finals championship roster because I don't trust his ability to stay healthy.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about it that we're pretty much going into year 10 of Embiid. So he's been around. We can't really, I guess, treat him like a younger guy anymore. Kind of like how you were
Mhm.
talking about. Regardless, I think the contract is awesome. For
Yeah,
both sides. You retain your franchise player, and the player is very happy because there were rumblings about him not being too happy with the kind of talent that they surrounded him with. But at the end of the day, um, you you kind of squash that, and that's cool. Does it
yeah,
make me feel confident that Philly's going to win a title? Not too confident, but I feel like if they build the teams the right way, then yeah, for sure. And it's always nice to
yeah.
have a centerpiece like Joel freaking Embiid because he's a historical all-time great big man. So, yeah, shout out to both sides.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the cool part is that now that kind of ends the discussions of, is he unhappy in Philly? Is he going to leave? At least for now, right? He's going to be there. And again, shout out to everybody involved in Philadelphia for being able to put together a roster that I did not really expect them to put together, but they found a way. So now they're going to have to find a way to finish the job and get through a bunch of teams in order to win the title. Again,
Yeah,
I don't expect them to do it, but again, Embiid is an incredible talent. So you have the talent at the top theoretically to be able to do it. It's just you gotta hope and pray that he's able to play through an entire season without any real significant injury. Because if he
yeah,
doesn't, then your chances are completely gone.
yeah,
And that's the tough part about relying on a guy like that. But if you're Philadelphia, that guy's too good to be for him to just kind of walk away and then you end the relationship. So
right.
if you're Philly, you got to do what you can, as long as he's there, and they've been doing that. So,
Yeah.
shout out to everybody involved, because again, like I said, I did not expect Philly to be able to, if we're talking about a year ago, I thought it might go sideways, but it did not. So,
Yep.
yeah, well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about the New Orleans Pelicans, their roster, what you expect them to do, what you're hoping to see from some of their young guys. What are you hoping to see from Zion and Ingram, right? Do you expect them to stay together? Do you expect, one of those guys to be moved, presumably Ingram? And then, about the rest of the league, right? What do you think about Ben Simmons? What do you think about Joel Embiid's contract? let us know. Again, if you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video. Continue to like and subscribe. Don't have much longer until media day. Don't have much longer until preseason. So obviously, as that stuff happens, we'll continue to talk about that as well, because we'll actually have some real basketball to discuss. So, hopefully people, can continue to support us and view our content and join the channel and, kind of join Off Ball Takes. And, because we have a lot of stuff that we would like to continue to do over the course of this upcoming season and beyond. So, thanks for all the support. We'll see you in the next episode.